The envelope hit the table before he even had a chance to sit down. Claudette had been rehearsing this moment for 3 weeks. The exact words, the exact expression on her face, composed, certain, not cruel but clear. She had promised herself she would not raise her voice. She would not cry. She would simply place the papers on the table, fold her hands, and say what she needed to say. "I want a divorce, Owen." He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He didn't move. Outside, a streetcar rattled past the kitchen window. The neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. The kitchen smelled like the coffee Claudette had made, and not drunk, sitting cold now on the counter because her hands had been shaking too much to hold anything. "Claudette." His voice was low, not angry. That was the thing about Owen. He was almost never angry. Where is this coming from? She had prepared for anger. She had not prepared for that voice, gentle and confused, like someone waking up to find the house rearranged. She pressed on anyway. "I've been thinking about this for a long time." That part was true. I need someone whose life is going somewhere, whose future I can actually see. That part was also true, she told herself. It was just true in a way that sounded worse out loud than it had in her head. Owen picked up the envelope. He turned it over once, the way he always turned things over before he opened them, like he was buying himself time to understand what was inside before he had to fit. Then he set it back down. "Is this because of what Yvonne said at dinner?" Claudette's jaw tightened. This has nothing to do with Yvonne. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Yvonne was Claudette's oldest friend. They had grown up 3 houses apart on the same street in Mississauga, gone to the same school, worn matching Halloween costumes until they were embarrassingly old for it. Yvonne had always been the one who knew what she wanted. At 19, she had started a logistics company out of her parents' basement. By 26, she had bought her own condo in Liberty Village. By 29, she was engaged to someone who wore a watch that cost more than Claudette's first car. Claudette loved Yvonne. She also, in ways she did not like to examine too closely, measured her own life against Yvonne's constantly. 3 months ago, Yvonne had thrown a dinner party in her new house, the one with the built-in wine fridge, and the heated floors and the kitchen island that seated 8. Claudette had sat across from Yvonne's fiancé, Brendan, listening to him talk about a development deal he was closing in Oakville, and she had looked at Owen beside her. Owen in his good but not great blazer. Owen who worked as a land surveyor for a city contract firm. Owen who had been nursing the same career for 6 years, without what Claudette considered visible momentum, and something cold had settled in her chest. On the drive home, Yvonne had texted her, "He's a good man, Claude." But is good enough? Claudette had stared at that message for 3 weeks. She never answered it, but she had answered it in a way by going to a lawyer and requesting the paperwork. Owen did not beg. That was the part Claudette had not expected. She had imagined this scene many times, and in every version he had asked her to reconsider, had listed reasons, had gotten emotional enough that she would have to be the composed one. She had braced herself for the weight of that, for having to hold her ground while he made it hard. Instead, he said, "Okay, just that, one word." He picked up the envelope and stood up slowly, the way he always stood up from chairs, deliberately, like he thought about each movement before making it. He went to the hallway. She heard him putting on his jacket, his boots. The door opened. The door closed. Claudette stood alone in the kitchen, with the cold coffee and the streetcar sounds and a feeling she could not immediately name. She named it later. Weeks later, after the papers had been signed and the process had begun, and she had moved into the spare room at her mother's house in Etobicoke until she found her own place. This feeling was not relief. It was not grief exactly. It was something in between, a low, hollow discomfort, like she had handed something away before she had fully understood its value. She didn't say that to anyone. She told Yvonne she was doing great. She started going to a yoga class on Wednesday evenings to have something to tell people when they asked what she was doing. She got a haircut. Life, on the surface, continued. 6 weeks after Owen left the apartment, Claudette was waiting for the Queen streetcar in the rain, when her phone buzzed with a notification from a news app she had downloaded once and forgotten about. She almost swiped it away. She would think about that later, how close she came to never seeing it. The headline read, "Survey and mapping firm Northgate Meridian closes 200M acquisition. Founder steps back from daily operations." There was a photo. She almost didn't look at it. Then she did. Owen was not in a blazer. He was in a suit that fit the way suits fit in magazines, standing in front of a glass-fronted building. She didn't recognize shaking hands with someone whose name she vaguely knew from the business section she had never paid attention to. The caption read, Owen Callahan, founder and outgoing CEO of Northgate Meridian Land Solutions, at yesterday's announcement in downtown Toronto. Claudette read the sentence 4 times. Founder, $200 million. She stood in the rain until the streetcar came and went without her. The story, when she eventually pieced it together through articles and a long, uncomfortable conversation with Owen's sister Britt, who had never fully warmed to Claudette and now had even less reason to, was not the story Claudette had expected. Owen had started Northgate Meridian 4 years before he met Claudette, not in a glamorous way. In a $300 a month office above a print shop in Hamilton, with 1 contract and 1 employee who was also his university roommate. The early years were grinding. He had put everything back into the company rather than drawing a salary that would have made him look successful on paper. He drove an old car. He kept their apartment modest. He worked hours that he described to Claudette as project management. Without specifying the project or the scope, he hadn't hidden it to deceive her. That was what Britt said with a flatness in her voice that made it worse. He wanted someone who wanted him, Britt said. Not what he had. He'd dated women who found out and suddenly everything changed. He was tired of not knowing which one he actually was to someone. Claudette sat with that for a long time. Why didn't he tell me? She finally asked. When things got serious. When we got married. Britt looked at her with an expression that was not unkind but was thoroughly honest. He was going to, when he felt sure. And then, she paused. Then you handed him divorce papers. The months after that conversation were the quietest of Claudette's adult life. She moved into a small 1-bedroom in Parkdale. She had imagined something bigger by this point in her life. Something with an island in the kitchen and heated floors, the version of herself she had been measuring toward. Instead, she had a galley kitchen, and a window that faced a brick wall, and a radiator that knocked all night in winter. She did not find it as devastating as she thought she would. That surprised her. She started taking long walks, across the Humber, through Trinity Bellwoods, down to the lake when the weather was bearable. She listened to things instead of thinking. She noticed things she had stopped noticing. The way frost made lacework on the underside of park benches. The particular smell of a Tim Hortons on a cold morning. The way strangers on the streetcar sometimes looked out the window with such private expressions. That you got the feeling everyone was carrying something they had never put down. She thought about Owen a lot. Not with longing exactly, more with something that functioned like clarification, a slow, uncomfortable understanding of who she had been in that marriage, what she had brought to it, what she had demanded from it without ever stating the demand. She had wanted a proof of arrival. She had looked at Owen and seen a man who hadn't arrived and had not considered that she might be wrong about what arrival looked like, or wrong about the map she was using. She saw him once, by accident, 7 months after the divorce was finalized. She was at a coffee shop near King and Bathurst, one of those places with exposed brick and single-origin espresso and lineups at 8 a.m. She was reading something on her phone. She heard the door open, registered the cold air, and looked up. Owen was there. He was wearing a jacket she didn't recognize, darker and better cut than anything she remembered him owning. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the chalkboard menu, the way he always looked at menus, slowly, like he was actually reading every option before deciding. He ordered. He turned. They looked at each other for a moment that lasted much longer than it was. "Hi," Claudette said. "Hi," Owen said. There was a pause. Not hostile, just genuine and unscripted. "How are you?" she asked. "Good." He looked like he meant it. "You?" "Getting there," she said. He smiled slightly. It was the same smile. The one that moved more in his eyes than his mouth. The one she had stopped registering somewhere around year 3 of the marriage. He nodded once, picked up his coffee, and went to a table near the window. She watched him open his laptop. She watched him settle into the chair the way he always settled into chairs. She watched the city move past the window behind him. She did not go over. She finished her coffee and put on her coat and went back out into the cold. Yvonne got married in September. The wedding was in Muskoka, at a lodge with a dock that ran out over the lake, and the whole thing was exactly as beautiful as Yvonne had planned it down to the centimeter. Claudette stood in the third row and watched her oldest friend walk towards someone who loved her, and she felt genuinely happy for Yvonne in a way that didn't have anything complicated underneath it, which was itself a kind of arrival. At the reception, Yvonne found her at the bar and hugged her for a long time without saying anything. "I shouldn't have sent that text," Yvonne finally said into her shoulder. "It's not your fault," Claudette said. "I know it's not entirely my fault, but I still shouldn't have." Claudette pulled back and looked at her. "Would I have done it anyway?" Yvonne considered this honestly. "Maybe. I don't know, probably." She shook her head. "You were so unhappy and I couldn't figure out why, and I said the wrong thing trying to help." "I was unhappy," Claudette agreed, "but not because of Owen. That was the part I got wrong." She picked up her glass. The lake was glittering through the lodge windows. Somewhere behind them the DJ was playing something low and early evening. "I was unhappy with myself," she said. "I just aimed it at him because he was there." She figured out slowly and without any single dramatic moment what she wanted her life to look like. Not Yvonne's life. Not any life she had borrowed from a magazine or a dinner party or a text message sent in a moment of careless intimacy. Her own life, which turned out to be quieter than she had imagined, and more specific, and harder to explain to other people, and fine. She started working with a community land trust in her neighborhood, helping coordinate surveys and mapping on revitalization projects. She was not the founder of anything. She did not close acquisitions. She ate lunch at her desk most days, and took the subway home and cooked simple meals in her galley kitchen. She learned, without anyone pointing it out, that she had been counting the wrong things for a very long time. Not money. Not floors and wine fridges and watches. Not the version of success that looked legible at a dinner party. The things that actually accumulated into something, into warmth, into steadiness, into a life that felt inhabited, were quieter than that. They didn't photograph well. They didn't make good answers to "how are you doing?" But they were the things that in her worst weeks had held. She called her mother on a Sunday in November, which she had started doing again after years of finding excuses not to. Her mother made tea over the phone. Claudette could hear the kettle, and asked how work was, and whether she was eating enough, and whether she had a good winter coat. All the small, repetitive questions that had once felt suffocating and now felt like what they actually were. A person keeping track of another person with the tools she had. "Are you happy?" her mother asked at some point. Claudette thought about it. "I think I'm getting better at knowing what happiness actually is," she said, "as opposed to what I thought it was." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That takes a long time." "Yeah, but it stays. Once you figure it out, it stays." After she hung up, Claudette sat by the window with her own tea and watched the first real snow of the season come down onto the street below. It was the kind of snow that came slowly, without urgency, covering things evenly and without preference. The expensive and the ordinary alike, all of it going white. She had stopped measuring. She had not yet stopped missing Owen, not entirely, but the missing had changed shape. It was softer now, less like a wound and more like a lesson she was still learning the last few pages of. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. Outside, the snow kept falling.